Dead blood in the streets, it's up to my ankles. Feet flat in the streets, it's up to my knees. Feet flat in the street, the town of Chicago. Feet flat on the rise, it's following me.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Abolitionist Abstractions. As always, we are covered by a BIPCOT no government license. This allows reuse by anyone except governments and the agents thereof. You can find out more information about this at bipcot.org. All right, so I am back with another episode this week, and I am joined by LdwvzThSKxtDDRDsDtVXTikYZiSKdJNCre, who, for those of you who don't know, is one of my co-hosts on the Freedom Fiends, but also, and probably more importantly, an independent journalist who writes for such outfits as the Free Thought Project, The Mind Unleashed, and I'm sure there's others I'm forgetting, but those are just two of the ones I remember seeing quite regularly. But yeah, so hey, John, thanks for joining me today, man. What's up?
Thanks for having me, man. Just chilling, man. Yeah, and that's pretty much the main two sites that I'm writing for right now. I've written for a number of different sites in the past, but that's kind of who I'm doing most of my work for now.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. Like I said, those are the two bylines. The two places I see you at most often, and yeah. I get to talk to you kind of regularly now. We do our Sunday night Fiend shows together, but I had wanted to get you on my other podcast, Seeds of Liberty, for a while because we all wanted to talk to you about the whole independent journalist thing, and we never got around to doing that. And plus, with your health issues and stuff, you've been kind of preoccupied over the past year or so. Although you are finally doing much better, as you've announced recently, which is awesome. And I was talking to you a couple weeks ago and saying I would love to get you on the Seeds, but just with scheduling conflicts, it's so much easier to do a show like this when I can record whenever my guests are available. So that's why we're doing it here. But anyway.
Yeah, I'm still back and forth to the doctor every other week and stuff like that too, or probably even more than that now. So even though everything's pretty much done, I still have to be doing all these constant checkups and everything. So.
Oh, of course, man. Of course. I get it. I've never had cancer myself, but I know plenty of people in my family who have, so I've seen them all go through this. But either way, things are looking up for you, so that's what we're most excited about. But
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, the original reason I wanted to talk to you, way back when, and ever since I first became aware of you, was kind of about the whole writing thing in general, just because I've talked to you a little bit about this off the air and stuff about my desire or lack of desire a lot of the times to get back into the writing world. And, I look to somebody like you who's been doing this for a while now, and it's, it's encouraging because, there's the fake news out there that everybody always claims, even people outside of our circles complain about the mainstream media and stuff. But then they still turn back to them over and over and over again because outfits like the ones you write for are just still considered to be fringe. Although I think the tide is turning a little bit now, hopefully. I think Trump actually, whether purposefully or not, kind of stepped into that with his constant throwing out the phrase fake news. I think more people are shifting in a direction of different news sources, but I don't know. What do you think about that? You think people are starting to catch on a little bit more now, or are they still looking at you like you're just some conspiracy nut who's just writing about craziness?
Well, there's pretty much there's definitely a lot of that attitude, and I think in the long term, it's been a huge advancements for alternative media. And I always use it as like an example of successful agorism, because everybody always says like, oh, you can't just go ahead and replace government institutions and stuff like that by just competing with them in the marketplace. But that's pretty much what we've done to the mainstream media, even though they're of course still relevant and they still build the paradigm that, most mainstream people believe in. They're not going to be the dominant force for very long. And, in the long-term scheme of things, it's very good for us. But I feel like recently with the whole fake news thing, it really all depends on what side of the fence you're on, because, or what side of the fence the people that are reading me are on, because pretty much anybody who's on the Democrat side of things thinks that like I'm a Russian agent now, and that anybody who, and there's that whole thing going on. and people on that side of things put so much trust in Snopes and all that. And then you got the people on the right who now they are a little bit more interested in alternative media and stuff. But who knows if that's just going to change when a Democrat gets in, because it just seems to be, it just seems to be the way that they just switch back and forth. Because even when you think about something like WikiLeaks, a while ago, it was the Republicans who hated WikiLeaks, and now it's the Democrats who are all accusing them of being Russian agents again and being in with Trump and all this just because, they didn't go along with whatever the particular wedge issue of the day is. So I definitely think that overall alternative media is making a difference, but things are definitely rough right now, especially with Facebook cracking down on us. So the future is kind of uncertain, and we may not have to we may not have the Facebook to depend on for very long, and we may have to find other solutions. And I think that might be better in the long run. But I mean, in the past 2 weeks, a whole bunch of stuff has been changing with Facebook, and that's pretty much where most of us get the word out and get our stories out. So I think that things are going to be changing a lot over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I can see that, and the issues with Facebook are numerous. But yeah, I know what you mean, especially recently with their pledge to, well, they pledged a while ago to start cracking down on fake news themselves, and then they just pretty much cut out, what do they cut out? Any kind of ad related to cryptocurrency and or anything like that, and which of course is funny because the first couple of ads I saw pop up after that were actual like get rich quick schemes of people that were just making up BS that had nothing to do with cryptos. But it's like, okay, so this stuff's okay, but our stuff isn't. I get you. But you mentioned the fact that people think that you're like a Russian troll essentially now, at least on the Democrat side. I don't remember, like, was the Free Thought Project at any of those? Were those listed as places like that? Because I know. Oh yeah, I know we
were on the first list that came out. The one that it was even before Trump got into office. It was the first. She wrote, a professor from somewhere wrote something in the Washington Post that was a list of sites that she thought was fake news, and it was basically The Onion and Hard Times and like funny sites like that mixed in with legit fake news sites like your Newswire that print total bogus stories. And then you had other legit, actual activist sites that may have their slant or their bias, but they don't, straight up just print, BS. So, we were definitely on there from the jump, and I think anti-war might have been on that one too.
Yeah, that was the one I remember, because I remember Scott Horton talking about. He's like, really. We're considered, we're considered fake news. All we do is report on foreign policy and have for a decade plus at this point. But yeah, for people like us, it's we can look at it and kind of laugh because it's the same type of thing as being somebody like us being listed on the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of hate groups. It's like a badge of honor to us, but as we're talking about, it's the perception that we have to worry about. And when you have, just even in this particular geographical location, the good old USSA, if you just take even this subsection of the planet, we are highly outnumbered. So most people don't think like us. And if we're looking to get information to them, and these institutions, which, like I said, we know to be complete BS, like the Southern Poverty Law Center or anything, or that professor in general who wrote that thing. I remember when that came out, it's like, yeah, we look at it and they go, well, that's just ridiculous. But so many other people, unfortunately, go, oh, these are the experts. They have to know. This has to be BS. So yeah, I could see how that could work against people like us if unfortunately you make a list and we could all laugh at it, but everybody else is going, oh look, it's the fake news.
And it gets used as a justification to censor us too and block us off, various social media sites and things like that. So I would wear it like a badge of honor, but then they always use it as some justification to prevent people from seeing our things. If it was just them laughing at us and criticizing us, I would be fine with that. But when they just straight up wipe us off the internet, that's a problem. And I have no problem admitting that I have a strong bias in my that's one of the criticisms that I get a lot, and that the sites I write for get a lot, is that, oh well, you guys have this slant and you guys have this bias, and we come out and say it, especially in the headlines, and there's this thing with journalism where everybody pretends to be objective and just bring in the facts, and there's no such thing as that. Everybody has a bias, everybody has an agenda, everybody has a slant. I put that all out on the table. You know what I mean? And somebody who tries to, just present themselves as objective, they're still lying by omission a lot of times. You know what I'm saying? They're still leaving facts out. They're still covering the stories that portray their things in a certain way. And I mean, you could tell the type of agenda that a person has from the type of stories that they cover. I mean, I cover stories about cops beating the hell out of each other, people all the time. Each other, I wish, but
yeah, we're not that lucky.
Yeah, well, it happens every now and then, but I write all these articles about government corruption and these cops, beating people, and so you could kind of gather that I have an issue with like the government or authority or whatever. If you see somebody who's writing articles about, the immigrant crime of the day or week or whatever every day, then you could tell what their agenda is. And then if you see somebody who's complaining about rich people and CEOs every single day, then you could tell what their agenda is. So regardless of, I just don't think this whole idea of objectivity in journalism thing, I think it's a joke, because there's no such thing as an objective human being. We're all judgmental. We make these judgments. We have opinions. And a lot of journalists out there are activists, even the ones that put on suits and pretend that they're just giving you the news. They're definitely trying to sway your opinion. And that's obvious in the mainstream news and the mainstream media. But I think that even in the alternative media, there's some people that... So when you do that, you won't look in areas that might get you criticized. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. And I mean, I agree with you. I've always thought, even before I became an anarchist, I kind of always thought the whole notion that somebody would strike down or not pay attention to at all any organization based on a quote unquote bias, especially when it comes to news, was always ridiculous, because it's like exactly what you said. Everybody has their own biases. To attempt to throw that out as an objection against pretty much anybody is really pointless, because you have to, in order to condemn one group for that, you have to condemn all groups for that. So to me, it's a moot point. Like, why even bring it up? Like, of course, like you said, of course, everybody has their bias. But also, like you said, at least you guys, when you do this type of stuff, you're open about it. It's usually the mainstream news, although I've found out over the years that a lot of quote unquote alternative media and the local stuff is the local newspapers and news organizations stuff. Sometimes they're even worse about this, because the
local ones are so bad.
Well, yeah, because they pretend to not have this bias, but they're outwardly, you can tell they're doing nothing but trying to mimic the mainstream. That's the situation I ran into last year when I had my problems with the press, because I got this TV reporter who thought she was some big New York Times person and could just do whatever she wanted and just storm all over the place. But that's the attitude.
And was that a reporter from a suburban market too, not even a big city market?
Yeah, it's the
yeah, see, that's even, they're the best, because those people they make the most and the most mistakes and the worst mistakes, and it's hilarious many times. We used to have a local newspaper here, and I don't remember any of the big things that were issues that they lied about or anything, but I remember I used to love sitting through and reading their police blotter because there was like nothing going on in the suburbs, so they would have to write about the most ridiculous things. Like somebody reported a car driving by with loud music. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I used to when I did still get the paper. That was one of the few things I did like to read, just because they were so entertaining. It was always like, yes, and for me too, especially around here, that's back when I was trying to figure out justifications for the police in general. You know, once I learned how much the police around here make, and it's like, wait a minute, these guys are getting paid this much money, and there's like no crime to speak of, really. Like in Nassau County here in New York, there's a couple of towns that are considered, you know, quote unquote bad, but they would they wouldn't stack up against some place like, say, I don't know, Camden, New Jersey, or Oakland, or downtown Detroit. You know, nothing like that. But that's what the suburbanites around here consider bad neighborhoods. But even there was, you know, there's virtually no actual crime. It's just they're harassing people over traffic stuff and drugs and stuff like that. But yeah, it was always funny to read that and just to see exactly what you said. It was literally stuff like somebody complained about this, or you know, I've actually seen. I saw ones in the local paper here. I remember that they actually reported on like kids doing ring and runs. Like, because they had nothing.
Oh,
they had nothing to go keep it.
And that's what suburban news is dealing with, you know?
Well, exactly. So yeah, they're always dying for a story. So they're, you know, especially when somebody like me pops onto their radar, it's like, ooh, we got a juicy one here. And then yeah, like you said, they kind of throw all the rules.
We have a local terrorist.
Yeah, but then they throw all the rules of, you know, whatever rules of journalism actually still exist in most people's mind. They just throw them all out the window, and they don't care. And they, like I said, they try to separate themselves from the mainstream news, but then they prove how desperately they're trying to be the mainstream news by doing the exact same thing, like jumping on a story without any facts, without bothering to check anything, just so they can be the first one on it. And
you know, I was talking with actually the team at Free Thought about this the other day, and it's okay for them to do that if they are covering an issue in a way that supports the mainstream narrative. But if they were to go around all willy-nilly, or even doing a ton of research on a story that was kind of unpopular or just was against the grain, then their burden of proof would have to be astronomical in comparison to the burden of proof that they would need if they're going in the same direction as the mainstream narrative. And that's why they could come after you like that, because you're some big bad terrorist anarchist who hates firemen, and
yeah.
you know, they can just go ahead and say that, because who's going to stop them? You know, I mean, it's just some fringe people, you know.
Well, yeah, well, exactly. Especially in my situation specifically, it's like, because the narrative already got started that not only was I this dangerous anarchist, but I was Antifa. You know, because of the shirt I was wearing, which to this day, like, I still can't think of that and not laugh, because it's like, did you people even read the shirt? No, of course not. You saw an A, you know, although some smart people that I saw who didn't agree with me at all, at least had the wherewithal to say, that could be the Avengers logo for all we know, people. What's wrong with you? It's just a giant A. But yeah, but exactly what you're saying, because that's what's been pushed in the mainstream for so long, that Antifa are these dangerous, you know, terrorists. And yeah, do certain members of the Americanized Antifa, do they do some really stupid things? And are they really a bunch of petulant children who don't really understand how the world works? Sure. But I've always had a problem, even when it came to that, because I know the history of Antifa, and I know it's not just some random movement that popped up in the U.S. as a reaction to the alt-right or whatever, like the media loves to claim. Yeah. No, I recognize that they've been over in Europe for decades, maybe even over 100 years at this point. I think that, it's just been an organization that, literally started off against anti-fascists, but because that's the narrative that was being pushed, and that's what most people on both sides of the false paradigm, that's the news they've been getting for so long. So yeah, you're right. All anybody has to do is just throw that out there, and automatically it is accepted as fact. and anybody running counter to it, whether it is the small news organization or itself, or outsiders trying to point out to the small organization that, hey, you don't have the facts right here. Yeah, it's sad. The burden of proof is actually much more difficult in reverse when it shouldn't be. But what can we expect? Because this is the good old USSA, where you're supposed to be guilty until proven innocent, but that's not how it works either. So.
Yeah, not at all. And it's interesting, too, because one of the changes that Facebook is putting into place with their new algorithm is that they're prioritizing local news, which is basically just handing everything over to the Associated Press and all these idiots that are bumbling around in counties like you and I live in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which again, that's one of those things that, you can say that, and I understand that, you understand that, but unfortunately, most people out there will think in terms of, oh, good, my local news, I can trust them a lot more than I can trust those big bad people in the mainstream media, totally not recognizing that, most local news stations, that's all they do, is they just pull their stories directly from the AP, and not even just directly from places like the AP or Reuters or whatever wire they're actually using. One of my favorite videos about the news ever is one of those couple of compilation clips that have been put together to show that it's literally a narrative that gets passed around the news as a general
that's
idea.
A good one.
Where it's news anchors from all over the country, from all different channels, all reading about a story, and they're literally reading it word for word for word. With just
I think I've seen that one.
There's a couple of them, and they're great because that is the reality. It's, sure, if you get a local news station, most of them have like their last 10, 15 minutes or whatever, they focus on actual like local news, or a lot of them like to finish off on that on the happy note where some positive story from some cutesy little story from the neighborhood.
Squirrel on the water ski.
Exactly, that type of thing. But on the whole, the big stories they're getting, none of these, whether it's news, whether it's in print, most of these people are not doing any investigative journalism. They're literally just doing copy pasta from the AP. And that video to me is such a perfect example of that, because it's like, how can you not watch this and not? How can you watch this and not go, oh wow, it really is all bullshit?
It's interesting. I forget what the damn name of the dude was, and I wrote about it in my first book. But when you write things, you know what I mean. But anyway, he was one of the early PR guys, and he worked for the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and like all of them, notorious families and stuff. And there was some kind of accident on some train or some like railway, a bunch of railway workers died or something like that. You know what I mean? And that was back when journalists would they would be trying to snoop things out. You know what I'm saying? They would be trying to catch the story. Well, this guy had an idea of like, all right, well, let's do the journalists' work for them. And he was the guy who created the first press release. And there was a press release for that incident, and all the papers just were like, oh, all right, word, this is what happened. And they just printed it word for word. And then they just started doing that all the time ever since. And I'll be able to look that up later, and we can put that in the show notes or whatever. But I'm drawing a blank on it now.
Yeah, no, that's fine, as long as you could shoot it to me. We got a little time before this is going to come out anyway. But yeah, it's true. If you want to get news from around the world, and you're a small time organization, and you can't afford to be sending your reporters all over the place to get like facts from on the ground type of thing. There's nothing inherently wrong with passing stories along like that. Like you were saying, the original intent of it was just like, oh, well, we'll gather this information to make it a little easier. Like, there's nothing really inherently wrong with that, at least in my opinion, as long as you're upfront about it. But that is, to me, that's what I see as the big one of the big problems, is that most of these organizations are not upfront about it. That they try to put their own their own little tiny little spins on these things to make it seem like not only are they being objective and unbiased and just presenting the news, but that it's actually theirs, so they can duck behind not just being complete plagiarists.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I feel like anytime there's a press release from any kind of official organization, it's crafted to put a spin on things. And I do remember the name of that guy. It was Ivy Lee, Ivyllee, and he was the inventor of the first press release. And it was, like I said, a railway accident. But yeah, I feel like public relations is involved with all this. And I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I feel like it's always deceptive, because even when I was throwing raves and stuff like that, we would put out an announcement about what was going on, or why a show was canceled or whatever, and 9 times out of 10 it was just some fluff to tell people, because what was going on behind the scenes was not able to be told. You know what I'm saying? But when you're dealing, but that's just like small potatoes, you know what I'm saying? When you're dealing with human lives, and when your business is war, or your business is imprisoning people, and you're putting together press releases like that, like police, military, and stuff like that, then it's a little bit more of a big deal that you're being deceptive about what's going on behind the curtain.
Well, yeah, of course, but like I said, I think again, for people like us, it's easy to look at this and go, yeah, the deceptive nature, we can see it. But unfortunately, most people don't recognize that. And that's why, again, I would have less of a problem, at least if some of these organizations were a little more upfront about these things. But of course, if you're talking specifically about government, which when it comes to the mainstream media, there's a reason that it's called the fourth branch a lot of the times, because, well, it essentially is. They're just repeating word for word exactly what the government whatever government entity wants them to say. It's
absolutely, and that's why I used them as an example earlier in a government institution that was replaced through Agorsim, or is being replaced through Agorsim, because even though they are quasi-private, I definitely consider them to be a government institution, much in the same way that private prisons are government institutions.
Oh, sure. And the so-called private Federal Reserve, pretty much most of pretty much anything the government is in contact with that they call private usually isn't. And there's a reason that people like myself throw around the word fascism and are not being hyperbolic, and have used it for a very long time to describe the United States government, because that's exactly what it is. Because when you have these different entities, especially ones as powerful as, say, the Federal Reserve or the media, when they are controlled essentially by the government, because whether it's through whether money's being sent their way or information's being sent their way or whatever it is, that is fascism. The marriage of corporation and the state, and having everything for the under the guise of some kind of capitalism, where, yeah, sure, people are allowed to keep their own businesses and keep their own money, but yeah, no, only the ones the government wants them who wants them to stay open and keep their money and keep their stuff. Those are the ones who are allowed to stay. That's kind of how that works.
And that's why a lot of sane, concerned people who only scratch the surface with their research, they end up thinking that private is a dirty word and stuff like that, because they just see on the surface all these institutions that are called private, all these things that are called free market and stuff like that, and they're anything but. So they have a very warped image of that. So that's another thing that we're pretty much going up against too, is not just people being uninformed, is that people just being misinformed, straight up thinking in the wrong direction.
Well, sure, and that's why, unfortunately, especially in this day and age, I mean, we are in what's often called the age of information, but it's as much the age of disinformation as it is the age of information, because there's so much stuff flying around out there, and I can understand why people would be hesitant to believe certain things, but of course, it's frustrating being on our side of the fence and going, well, you keep running back to the one institution that keeps screwing everything up, but whatever. No accounting for taste, I suppose. But yeah, there's a lot to be fighting against, and that's why I'm glad there are people out there like you, at least trying. And like we said earlier, I think at least hopefully, more and more people are starting to turn to different sources of information rather than just the standard, what is considered the standard bearers, because they have been proven to be wrong so many times. And that is one of the good things about the age we live in, is they can put all this information out, but just as quickly as it can be put out, counter stories can be put, counter narratives can be put up almost immediately afterwards. So at least there's a fighting chance for the other side to be told, which is where, normally people like yourself come in. And,
Yeah.
I was actually wondering, I was thinking about this before, and, I've talked to you a bunch about this stuff in the past, and I've heard you speak about the whole being in the independent media in general, but I don't even think I know I never asked, but I don't think I've ever even heard, like, what was your impetus to get into this in the first place anyway? Was it this like recognition that everything else was crap, or was it something else that kind of pushed you to get into the whole, like, being the independent journalist that you are? I mean, I know you're an author and stuff too, but like, what was the draw?
It was like an accident of circumstance, really.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So after I put my my rave business on hiatus and I got out of that, I had this job delivering sound and lighting equipment. It was a really good job. It was like the best job I ever had. I was making like between $15, $20 an hour and stuff, which was really good for me. And a couple months into it, I got arrested in the parking lot because a cop followed me. And it was in an industrial park, and it was like 2 a.m. that I had to be at work to pick up a truck and stuff. And of course, I got weed on me. I always got weed on me. It's going to be the way it is. And I only had a gram on me, but I told them that they couldn't get in the car, and they like ripped me out the window, and in front of like everybody that I was working with that was waiting for me to drive a truck to a gig. So I ended up getting fired. And I had just finished my first book around that time, and I was just trying to figure out how to promote that. And, I just started writing articles on the website for my book just to promote it, to promote the website, to promote the book, to get generate attention for it. And then I ended up getting the attention of some of the more like conspiracy-minded websites, because that's really that was the culture I started out, and that was my first book was heavily conspiracy stuff. It wasn't like super lizard people stuff, but it was definitely ruling class, banking families, and stuff. That was like a small portion of the book.
So more Alex Jones, less David Icke. Gotcha. All right.
yeah, but not like current Alex Jones. Like 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, back when he was fun.
Exactly, and it also it was kind of like a mix between like Terrence McKenna, Alex Jones type stuff, which is like the kind of stuff I was into at the time. But anyway, I was promoting that, and Activist Post, who I still write for every now and then, was the first site to hit me up and ask me to publish the articles. And I did that for a while, and then a couple of other websites offered to pay me.
Nice.
So I was like, wow, I get to get paid to do this activism thing. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, it's of course like, the same amount that you'd get to deliver pizzas a lot of times, but it's still getting paid, and that's one of the, not to take too much of a sideline here, but that's one of the things that kind of sucked about the YouTube cutting out small content creators, because just getting paid a little bit in the beginning, just even if it's like $20 or something like that, just knowing that the market appreciates your contribution to it really gives you the confidence to keep on going. You know what I mean? So I've bounced around between a couple different sites over the years, and I've found that as much as I really do like the books and doing the long form stuff, a lot of people don't read that stuff, and it's really hard to get the stuff I write in my books to them. Even when I put them out for free, I have 4 books out right now, and 3 out of 4 of them are free. And we have maybe like 25,000 downloads on the free books and stuff like that, but that isn't near what my articles see. I mean, I might have an article that does that in a day. You know what I mean? So I've found that even though I prefer the long form of books and I still do keep on writing them, the articles just, it seems to be more worth my time in a lot of ways, as far as people seeing it and people getting the message. I feel like the vast majority of the people who I've influenced towards believing in freedom, I guess you could say, I think the most of those people have found out through my articles and stuff like that. And I'm not taking credit for converting a whole bunch of people or anything like that. I think I'm a part of a greater movement and stuff. I think that 9 times out of 10 people read these articles and they don't even notice who the author is. But just the fact that we're all doing it and chipping in, I think it's making an impact.
It's funny that you said that about not even recognizing who the author is, because when you were mentioning before kind of when you got your start, I had almost completely forgotten about Activist Post. I haven't read their stuff in quite a while, but that actually is the very first place I became aware of you, long before I became friends with you or anything. The first time I ever came across any of your work happened because I read Activist Post kind of regularly back then, and I stumbled across one of your articles. That's pretty funny. I guess I'm that 1 out of 10 person who does pay attention to the name of the person, because I remember seeing your name, and that's when I stumbled across the Free Thought Project later. I saw your name again. I'm like, hey, I know this guy. I've read his stuff before. So that's kind of where I became aware of you. But the other thing you mentioned, even though it was kind of like as you call it, a little bit sidebar, but the whole thing about the YouTube and the content creators, I get that too, because I'm somebody who puts out content and has for the past couple of years, mostly in the form of podcast, obviously, but that, even though it wasn't a lot of money that we were seeing, because we were one of those people, our channel on YouTube had been demonetized multiple times before this recent thing where they pretty much just shafted all of us all of us smaller content creators, I guess. They had knocked us out a bunch of times for some BS, but even the meager amount of money we were getting, you're right. It felt good that we were at least getting some kind of payment for the work, some kind of offering for the work we were putting out.
Even if you get to take your family out to a nice dinner once a year from it or something like that, you know what I mean? It's something.
Well, yeah, that's another reason that I'm fine. I've said it before that I'm finally on Steam it after poo-pooing it for so long, because it's the same type of thing. Is it a lot of money? No, but it's just the fact that, because it's not a matter of me trying to get paid for this stuff, because I don't do, if I finally get back into the writing mode and I try to start doing more like articles and stories and become more of a journalist like you are, then I might. But currently what I do as far as creating content with the with the videos and the podcasts that I put out, is it nice to make money every once in a while? Sure, but my main purpose is just to get these ideas out there. So for me, the little bit of money that I get is just kind of like that added bonus that it's like, okay, well, I was going to be putting this stuff out for free anyway, because I pretty much
exactly,
I was using Facebook,
and that's how I started with the art. I was putting out articles for free for 2 years before anybody offered to pay me for one.
Yeah, but you had a specific purpose. You were trying to promote your book. For me, it's just a matter of trying to get more listeners, basically, whether it's for this podcast, whether it's for Seeds of Liberty, whether it's the Lulberts, whether it's the Freedom Fiends. I just like these ideas getting out there, and I'm going to keep posting them anyway, because I'm one of those people who tries not to complain too too much about what goes on Facebook, only because I've been very aware the entire time I've been there what kind of platform it is, because I came late. I was one of those people, one of the latecomers to Facebook. I kind of clung on to MySpace a lot longer than I ever should have.
I did too, yeah.
Yeah, so when I finally came over, there was a bunch of people who had already been established here, and I kind of saw, and they had, I guess, different expectations as it was couched originally. Obviously, things have changed over the years because, well, once you become number one in a particular market and you have no real competition per se, because unfortunately, as much as I love Steemit and I hope more people keep making the exodus over that way, I've certainly seen a lot more posts, at least from our circles, on Facebook and different social media sites of people saying they're trying to shift that way.
I feel like Steemit has way more staying power than any other Facebook competitor has in the past 5 years. I mean, we've seen Diaspora, Sue, all them things fail within months,
Well, yeah, and I think at least a good portion of the reason for that, I believe at least, is the fact that the blockchain is involved. Because that for me, that's the biggest thing where, it's nice, again, if people want to upvote me and kick a little money my way, that's great. Obviously it makes me feel good, but my intention originally for going to Steem and shifting all of our content over there, the Seeds of Liberty stuff, we've been on YouTube since we started, and I'm in the process of trying to shift all of our stuff. It'll obviously probably stay on YouTube. I don't think I'll ever delete it unless they finally cancel our channel. But once we're all caught up and shifted over, all of our content is on DTube and on DSound. We're not even going to post stuff to YouTube anymore. Like, you'll be able to find our old stuff there, but we're not even going to use it. And again, like I said, the money, of course, is nice, the little bit that gets kicked here and there. But for me, again, it was just having a place to put it where it could never be taken down. No matter what people think about it, whether people want to shit all over it or people want to share it around and praise what we're saying, I don't care. It's the fact that it's there and nobody can do anything to it. Like I said, they can crap all over it, but it's still there. Other people are going to get a chance to view it later on. We don't have those assurances with YouTube or Facebook or any of the other social media sites. And heck, even if the people who run the Steem decide to go crazy and it becomes the pump and dump that so many people have warned for so very long, all right, whatever. My stuff's still there, though. They ain't destroying that. I don't care.
Yeah, exactly. I think that that with that, it's gonna be over the next couple of years. But I hope that it's Steemit that ends up replacing Facebook, of course, because I have all this time invested in it and I've kept a lot of Steem in there to keep my profile or something. But I think that all of these blockchain solutions are going to replace a lot of things, and it's only a matter of time. I hope it's not a Steemit competitor. I hope it's Steemit, like I said, but if it isn't Steemit, it'll be one of their competitors, and it'll be something similar.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, because like you said, there's been attempts and they have not gone very far, and really the only main difference I've seen between any of them and Steemit, I mean, obviously besides the team behind it and the community that ends up forming around it, the only real, the biggest difference has been the addition of the blockchain in there and those technologies. That's what has set it apart. Because I remember when Sue first started up, there was a there was an attempted mass exodus, I should say. I remember so many people throughout the Liberty community being, everybody had a post on their page about, hey, here's my Sue account, come see me over there.
Yep.
And at least half those people were all claiming, that's it, bye Facebook, I finally found a new home, type of thing. And this was, that was over 2 years ago at this point. So that was before Facebook got even as bad as it is right now with its, with the way it's. Whatever, the censorship thing, I hate to use that word sometimes because I always think of government when I think of that, but just like the way they're trying to shape narratives like that's...
Well, it's they were just in Congress telling the government that they'll do their bidding, you know what I mean? So just because it's a private company doing it, it's like they got the government right behind them, either forcing them or telling them what to do.
Oh no, I agree with that. I just meant in general, like the whole term censorship. I think of that as, I think of that as like a government term, because like when people try to bring up like the the First Amendment and freedom of speech, I'm like, okay, first of all, you don't have any idea what that actually means, because they're usually yelling about actual private companies censoring them. I'm like, no, that's not how that works. Private companies are allowed to tell you what you can and can't say in their places of what they own. It's kind of how it works. But just the whole But the whole idea of censorship, I think of it as like a government thing. I'm just like, no, because I think of things in terms of private property. So I'm like, I don't even want to go there.
Absolutely.
But they're definitely trying to shape the narrative, and they're not. Although, going back to something we mentioned earlier, on one hand, I do have to give companies like Facebook, other ones too, but Facebook specifically, a little bit of credit, because at least they're out upfront about this stuff. That is the one thing. It's scummy. I don't like it. I'm quite happy to find another platform to go to permanently. Once like I said, I'm trying to shift over to Steam right now. I'm kind of with you on that. I don't have nearly the entire time or effort invested in it that you do, but I like the platform and I would like to see this one succeed. But I also agree that if it is, if it's something else, it'll probably be something along the same lines, and that's just the way things work. But
I think, as far as Facebook goes, I think that the U.S., Europe, China, India will probably be the last to leave Facebook. That's what I think. But I think the rest of the world will be leaving Facebook like in the next year. There are people in like these countries leaving Facebook now in small numbers, but most of the people, I would say 60% of the people that I encounter on Steemit and stuff, they are from Africa or some random Asian country. You know what I'm saying? And I just, it's hard to put into words, but I feel like they are ahead of the curve with a lot of this blockchain stuff and a lot of the next technologies. And there's this thing, I think it's called like leapfrogging or something with technology. There's a more technical term for it, but it's basically the idea of like certain places are behind in technology for a certain period of time. You know what I mean? But sometimes they'll catch on to the newer trends first. So you have some places where there were never power lines built or phone lines, but they now have cell phones. So they skipped a generation in the technology. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah.
So like.
Oh, go ahead.
So I was just saying, I think that like a lot of that is happening right now in most of the world. And I feel like a lot of the Western countries and, the countries that like China and India that have been really big into the last generation of tech, I feel like they're going to be behind in a lot of these races. And I feel like that's why we're seeing a lot of these countries cracking down on crypto more than the other ones.
Well, no, that makes sense, and it's funny you were talking about the the leapfrogging and the kind of like the generation skipping when it comes to technology, and like the first thought I had was whenever I think about that type of stuff, my mind automatically just goes back to like the Eastern European countries in the early like in the late 90s, early 2000s that were like just getting the the early 80s music, and like whenever you would see videos and stuff, because like that's the whole idea that they're always behind, like. And that's one of the first things I always picture. But as soon as I started to think about it, I'm like, well, of course, yeah. And then look what's happened. Like, look where a lot of the technologies are springing up from. It's exactly those places. I mean, you talk about different forms of communication and the newer ways, and whether it's crypto or just like encrypted stuff in general. Look at apps like Telegram and Signal. Both of them were started by Russian anarchists. People that, again, you would think they're behind in the times.
And Ethereum, you got that crazy guy over there.
Yeah, Vitalik. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so exactly what you said. Most people, I think, have a similar vision to me, because I know when I mention this to a lot of people, they all go, "Oh yeah, I remember that." Like, you remember seeing those things, like kind of laughing about it, like, "Oh, they're like 20 years behind us and stuff." Although the same thing used to happen to a greater extent. It's not as bad now, but there were certain places within the United States that were kind of like that too. Like I had friends in the South, in certain places that were always behind me.
There are still places like that.
No, I know.
near
There's
me.
less though. It's not as bad.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's this one place that I used to throw parties at, like the main place, and they were like stuck in the 70s, and it was hilarious. Like all the the McDonald's sign in their part of town was like, you could tell it was from the 70s, and the McDonald's sign on the other side of town was like new and stuff like that. And it was like that with every single store.
Oh yeah, no. Like I said, there's definitely still pockets like that, but it has become lessened. But I think it's interesting, thinking of it in those terms, because like I said, that's kind of the reality right now. Those are the type of people that 10, 20 years ago were kind of laughed at because they were so far behind, allegedly. But now with the shift in technology, all of a sudden they're the ones that are on top of things. And that is
and it's the ones who are addicted to the previous generation who aren't able to catch up.
Yeah, well,
but those people who are ahead of the curve, they never had that generation, so they're not addicted to any of that, and then they could think about it with new eyes,
Yeah, they're going for what works, not what has worked, because they don't have that tunnel vision like the people who are, essentially, well, a term that gets used that I use for myself a lot, that kind of quasi-Luddite mentality where it's like, nope, we got something that works. We're not going to change it. There's no need to change it. There's new stuff. We don't need that. Well, no, you see it happening rapidly, and it's great. I mean, like I said, whether it's crypto, whether it's being able to connect through the messaging stuff, and the other thing I wanted to say, the one point you brought up about Steemit in particular and the people that you're finding there, I find the same thing. I've made a connection. I've made connections with a lot of people, specifically in like the Middle East and stuff. That seems to be where I'm getting making a lot more connections there, and the Eastern Europe types areas and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure the U.S. probably will be one of the last ones that clings to the Facebook and stuff like that. But I hope the exodus continues, because it's, whether it's people are using it for connection purposes or for their source of news. Because I mean, I am one of those people who get a decent amount of my news through social media, because, well, that's just where all the stories are anyway. Not that they're putting out the news, but that's where everybody collects all that, where they aggregate everything. But
exactly,
I did hear, I was going to say recently, but I believe it was even today. Earlier today I was listening to the most recent Sovereign Tech podcast, and
I heard that one.
Yeah, and Brian did say something about the fact that Facebook is down like 1 million. They're reporting they're down 1 million users, like very recently, like within the last couple of weeks or a month or something. And who knows? Maybe the exodus is starting, or maybe they've actually just cleaned out a bunch of sock accounts. Because I always remember when they kind of threw out the number that like they have like 2 billion accounts. My first thought was always like, yeah, and how many of those are socks? Because most of my friends have at least 3 apiece. So.
That is totally true.
I can only imagine out of their 2 billion accounts that they claimed originally, how many of them were actually real accounts to begin with. But if they're actually putting out information that their numbers, like I said, I think it was at least 1 million. It might have been more. But, that's in what's supposed to be a 2 billion customer market right there, 1 million may not be that much, but since it is still considered the king of the hill, because up until, with this most recent resurgence of Steemit, because I know I'm not the only one who has kind of walked back their original thoughts and is now there, because I'm seeing a lot more people these days making the shift over there and making comments similar to me, like I stayed away from it because I thought it was a scam, but hey, it's a year plus, almost 2 years later, it's still here, and we and Facebook is getting worse, so we need a new one. But that is the reality, that right now Facebook is still like the standard for that. Up until now, there really hasn't been any actual competition. So if they're losing any part of the market, that's got to be a bad sign for them and a good sign for other opportunities, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, this is the first earnings report in the history of Facebook where they had a decrease in the amount of users. So that is definitely significant. I just think it'll be a little bit slower here in America, but I definitely think it's happening.
Well, that's good enough news for me because we always need some positives because there's always so much crap out there.
Yeah, Dan. I always try to I always try to look for some halfway decent stuff to cover. Sometimes, like I'll be like, oh man, like the past 3 days have just been cops smashing people's teeth in. Like I got to find something different.
Well, yeah, actually, but that's another good thing about the stories that you put out, because again, I read a lot of them, especially now that I am over on Steemit and you put a lot of your stuff out there, and it makes it so much easier because I'm there anyway. And it's not just because you're a friend of mine and I want to support you, but I actually read your articles, and that is one of the things I enjoy. That, as we were talking about earlier, you have your own bias just like anybody else does, which is why a decent amount of your stuff focuses on specific topics like the police brutality or like different drugs and stuff like that, because that's what you like to write about. But even with that, you still try to mix in pretty regularly these positive stories, which again, I used to be strictly just about, I just want the news. I just don't want the news. I don't want these like what I consider like fluff filler pieces. But I have a better appreciation for him now because I've realized how screwed up the world really is. And
yeah, it helps keep me sane.
Yeah,
and I try. I don't want to totally participate in the whole fear porn thing. I wrote for this one site. I haven't mentioned their name on the air, and I won't. And it's not one of the people I mentioned before, but the guy that owned it one day told me, find something that'll scare people.
Oh man. Yeah.
So like I didn't work there very long after that. But it's one of those things where pretty much only the bad stuff gets covered ever, even regardless of what the slant is or the bias is. And there are plenty of good things that happen in the world. I mean, when I go through my day, it's not all arrests and muggings and stuff like that. There's a lot of good that happens throughout the day, and it doesn't get as many clicks and all that, but you got to keep that in there.
Yeah,
but I think that's why you don't see as much of it, because it doesn't get as many clicks.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, we're talking about like the world maybe you and I would like to see, and then the reality that we're in. And unfortunately, that the owner of that particular outfit that you were talking about, well, that's the mentality that is most of what is considered the news these days. The whole "if it bleeds, it leads" thing. There's a reason that statement gets thrown around a lot, because it's true. That's what does sell. Unfortunately, fear sells. Or fear, and especially fear, and then the fact that your big mighty government can come save you from that fear, which also gets pumped out through the media. Those two things go hand in hand. But yeah, it is unfortunate. But like I said, I used to be a type of person that would blow those type of stories off, but I have a new appreciation for them now. So I appreciate the fact that you put those out there. I mean, heck, we talked about one of them last night on the Fiends that we recorded, the one about the guy who got the huge tip from the CEO. Those things are I said when we talked about it that, yeah, okay, on one hand I'm a little jealous because it never happens to me, but hey, again, at least I'm being honest, right? But overall, it's one of those stories that makes you, it may not make you feel warm and fuzzy inside, but it's kind of like, well, all right, the world isn't exactly completely dead. We shouldn't burn everything to the ground. There are, the institutions may suck. And
it balances the stories about the greedy cigar smoking CEOs that you see in other cases,
Exactly. Although I'm sure if certain segments of the population got a hold of a story like that, they'd be able to find a way to twist that around and make the CEO an evil person. Anyway.
I'm sure that the commies would have had something to say regardless.
Yeah. Well, damn commies. Anyway. All right. Well, on that note, I think we should probably get wrapping up because I hear my kids are home now, and I'm sure they're going to want to eat dinner and stuff soon. But thank you very much for coming on today, man. It was great talking to you, and I'm glad.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Oh yeah, like I said, I've been wanting to do this for a while, so I'm glad we got to do it in this setting. Because as much fun as it would be having you on my other podcast, the Seeds of Liberty, I don't often get a word in edgewise with my guests when I have my co-host there. So that's why I like doing these one-on-one conversations here. But before we get going, please plug away anything you want to plug, and then of course I'll throw anything and everything you want in the show notes as well.
Well, pretty much the best place to check out every single thing I do is steemit.com/@JohnVibes. And yeah, that pretty much any article, or I honestly share more there than I do on Facebook these days. And you can find my books at theconsciousresistance.com/books. And that's Derek Brose's website. He's my co-author with most of my books.
Yes. Oh, Derek, that's another person I've been trying to track down for a talk for a couple of years now. One of these days, I'll work that out. But yeah, so yeah, definitely. If you haven't read any of John's stuff, definitely go check it out. And of course, I'll put all those links in the show notes and stuff. So, all right. Well, once again, thanks, John. This has been great. Thank you, everybody, for listening. This has been Abolitionist Abstractions. All of my content, actually, all my stuff can be found now at steemit.com/@abolitionistj. But most of my stuff can still be found at our website, solpodcast.org. And there's links to everything, including, I think, the Steemit now. My buddy Paul Gordon finally got that up on the website for us. So most of my stuff can be found there. So once again, thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll catch you next time. Love, peace, and voluntary interactions for all.
Indians scattered on Dawn's highway bleeding. Ghosts crowd the young child's fragile eggshell mind.